Hey friends, today we're looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Let us hear the word of the Lord. Now when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away, that they may go to their villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up towards heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. Thanks be to God for the reading of his word and for the preaching of it. Well, interestingly enough, this is the only miracle story that appears on all 4 of the Gospels. But the message is so rich, so you can understand why that is so. Jesus has just heard the horrific news about Herod beheading John the Baptist. And now he's looking for a place that is quiet, where he can rest and grieve the ways of this world. Jesus wants to be alone for a while. John was his family in blood and in spiritual call as well. I felt the way of grief when you just want to be alone. Even in a room full of people, a grieving person can pull themselves into themselves and look as though they're empty as they stare off into space, still and stone-like. But Jesus' attempt to be alone does not succeed, for the crowd has gone ahead of him along the shore, planning to catch him at the other end of his boat ride. At this point, he's been teaching in proximity to the Sea of Galilee. In Mark's version, the disciples had just returned from being sent out in 2 by 2s and reported all that had happened to them. As Jesus suggested, he takes them with him. But we are told when he sees the crowd, he has compassion on them. They are like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus, like David, the shepherd boy who wants to meet the needs of his sheep, Jesus wants to meet the needs of his people. He needs respite for sure, but the people were so pitiful and their needs were so great that he subjugates his own plans to meet their needs. They were egocentric, just like us. Their needs always have preeminence over others' needs. But the shepherd is not that way. He's merciful and gracious to this crowd. At this point, it's difficult to get away from the crowd. Remember, in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he sought out people, going from village to village, town to town, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. The reaction of the people was mixed. Later, Jesus began to spend less time in public. In the last year of his life, he began devoting more time to be with his disciples. Many of these people had run ahead of Jesus and met him on the other side. They were individuals who wanted to be healed or entertained in some mystical kind of way. Certainly, there were those who were waiting to see if this man was going to save them from the grips of Rome. Nevertheless, God chooses to accomplish his purposes in the face of ungodly motives or desires. Imagine 5,000 men and a comparable number of women, and then children on top of that, pressing in on you. He could have dismissed the crowd if he wanted, telling them there's no teaching or healing that's going to take place at this time. However, although Jesus needed rest, his heart broke for these people. He had a visceral reaction to seeing them. He couldn't squander his time when the needs were so great. When evening came, which meant the hours between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, the disciples were concerned about the lateness of the hour. They knew that the people needed time to get themselves home. Town was miles away, and time to prepare food. I find it very interesting that the disciples all of a sudden start giving orders to Jesus. Send them away, they say to him. They do not think that Jesus can see what time of day it is, or that he needs to be told what to do with this crowd. How arrogant. It sounds more to me like they're consciously wanting but not saying, I want to go home and get something to eat and rest, so get rid of this bunch so I can. They're just as self-centered a crowd as the crowd was, and that shouldn't surprise us. Of course, Jesus' response is, well, if you're so concerned about them getting food, then you feed them. I would have loved to have seen the look on their faces when he said that. They're like, what did he say? Is he suffering from a heat stroke? Impossible, they reply. There are only 5 loaves and 2 fish amongst all these people. And, some child brought that. And there's no stores in sight, much less money enough to purchase enough food to feed these people. It would cost the equivalent of a year's income to purchase enough food for them. They want to give Jesus a lesson in finance. Please note that I told you that the disciples had returned from the mission where they reported how they had taught, how they had performed miracles. Well, tell me what happened to that miracle-making kind of thinking. Their problem was not dissimilar to how we behave. We're more than eager to be about the business of solving whatever problems we're up against. That is our need to control that's kicking in, instead of turning to our Creator to involve Him in the process. You see, when He gets involved, we see a world of difference. We step into miracle territory, and 5 loaves and 2 fish turn into 12 full baskets of leftovers, and everyone having a full belly. It reminds you of God providing manna in the wilderness for His people, or a similar story about Elijah feeding people out of God's abundance. All this is nothing new in the world of the children of God. Never doubt that God can provide. If we can just quit being so self-sufficient, if we never expect a miracle, then we will never see one. We see Jesus taking the meager resources and praying a blessing over them. He looks away from the disciples, away from the crowd, away from this desolate place, and he turns to the Father. That's where the answer lies, not in the things of this world. This story involves not just Jesus teaching, but also involving the disciples. He tells them, "You give them something to eat." They encourage the people to sit down, they distribute the food, and they collect the baskets afterwards. We are those disciples today who are to be involved and not just taught. It seems too hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that our God is a God of abundance. His resources are infinite. Why do we keep operating from a mind of scarcity? Do we feel like we are alone with too little skill, time, money, or concern? The church does not just exist for us. We exist for the church. The church is at its worst when it thinks only about its survival. Take care of people, and the church will take care of itself. Jesus makes something out of nothing. Change your mind and change your life. And all God's children said, Amen.